First class with that sweatshirt? Sure you are, sweetheart. That's what the gate agent sneered before tearing a black woman's passport in half, right there at the boarding gate, in front of stunned passengers. What she didn't know was that the woman in joggers wasn't just any traveler. She was a federal investigator, with the power to ground planes and launch nationwide audits. What began as petty racism spiraled into a career-ending disaster, federal charges, and one of the biggest scandals in airline history. This is the story of how one arrogant moment triggered a storm no one saw coming. Imani Blake felt the kind of deep exhaustion that only came after a successful high-stakes operation. For the last 10 days she had been living out of a sterile hotel room in Miami, leading a complex undercover audit of airport security protocols. The project, codenamed Operation Safe Skies, was her brainchild, designed to stress-test the nation's aviation security systems from the inside out. It was grueling, thankless work. It involved careful observation, pretending not to know things and filing endless reports late at night. Now, all that stood between her and her bed in Washington, D.C., was a 2-hour flight. She had intentionally dressed down for the trip. Simple gray joggers, a worn Howard University sweatshirt, and sneakers. Her hair was pulled into a neat, tight bun. After a week of playing roles, a flustered tourist, a tough business traveler, a nervous first-time flyer, she just wanted to disappear into the crowd. Her first-class ticket, a small but necessary perk after the intensity of the mission, was her quiet reward. It promised a wider seat, some peace and time to breathe. Lincoln Cross International Airport buzzed like always, a mix of rolling suitcases, overhead announcements, and the hum of 1,000 conversations. Imani moved through the crowd with practiced ease. Her backpack hung off one shoulder, carrying just a laptop, a novel, and a thick folder filled with early findings that were about to shake the aviation world. She arrived at Gate B32, where Skylinks Airlines Flight 1142 to Monroe Regional was scheduled to board in 20 minutes. The gate was already packed, a collage of faces, a family struggling to wrangle 3 loud kids, a flock of businessmen in nearly identical navy suits, and an elderly couple quietly sharing a bag of pretzels. And then there was the gate agent. Her name tag read Carol, printed in a crisp, formal font. She looked to be in her late 40s, with stiff, over-processed blonde hair and a mouth permanently set in a judgmental frown. She moved like her job was a performance, banging on her keyboard too loudly and speaking to passengers like they were beneath her. Imani couldn't help but observe, it was second nature. She watched as Carol smiled sweetly at a white family with rosy-cheeked kids, calling them sweetheart, and promising that everything was just perfect. Then came an elderly Indian man who asked softly if the flight was on time. Carol didn't even look up. "It'll board when it boards," she snapped. "Listen for the announcement." Imani felt a familiar pang. She called it authority bias. When someone in a uniform, no matter how minor, used their little power to create a hierarchy based on prejudice. This was one of those human factors that could compromise real security. A crack in the system, easily exploited. Finally, the speaker crackled. "We now invite our first-class passengers to begin boarding. Please have your boarding pass and valid government-issued ID ready for inspection." Imani joined the short line. When it was her turn, she held out her phone with the digital boarding pass and then offered her U.S. passport. Carol looked at the boarding pass. Then at Imani. Then the passport. Her eyes roamed over Imani's Howard sweatshirt, her sneakers, her skin, and her face shifted. The fake smile she had just shown the white family vanished. "A passport?" Carol asked, her voice full of suspicion. "For a domestic flight?" "It's my main form of government ID. It's valid," Imani replied, calm and even. She had used it all week. It was standard. Carol took the passport, flipping through it with disinterest. She held it up to the light, squinting. "This photo doesn't look like you," she said. Imani didn't flinch. The photo was 5 years old, but still clearly her. "My face hasn't changed that much," she said lightly. Carol laughed, sharp and mean. "Funny. You look younger here. Happier." She tapped her fingernail on the passport page. "Imani Blake. Doctor of what? Philosophy? Let me guess, art history?" The microaggressions were piling up. Tiny cuts. Imani knew the script well, not just at work but in life. The questions. The tone. The assumption that she didn't belong. "My doctorate is in aeronautical engineering," she said, her voice more firm now. "Is there a problem with the document, or may I board?" That clear, direct question seemed to poke something in Carol. "There's a problem with me believing this is legitimate," Carol said, lowering her voice to a whisper, but loud enough for people behind Imani to hear. "First class?" A brand new passport? It doesn't add up. It wasn't a new passport. Imani kept her documents in perfect condition. But the accusation, ugly and loud, now lingered in the air. I can assure you it's legitimate, Imani said, her patience thinning. It was issued by the U.S. Department of State. You can verify it through your system. I'd like to get to my seat. Carol leaned in slightly, a cruel smirk curling on her lips. Or maybe you bought it. People like you can be very resourceful. I've seen it all, fake IDs, fake credit cards. She scanned Imani up and down again. Fake everything. Imani's blood went cold. The insult wasn't veiled anymore, it was loud and racist, delivered under fluorescent lights in the guise of corporate procedure. She knew she had to de-escalate. She had written the very protocols for situations like this. But she was also human. Exhausted. And this was too much. Ma'am, Imani said, her voice hard as steel, you are making serious and unfounded accusations. Scan the document. Verify it. Or call your supervisor. But you will not stand here and slander me. Carol's eyes lit up like she'd won. She held up the passport like it was contaminated. Oh, I'll do more than that, she hissed, eyes gleaming. I'm going to resolve this situation right now. And with a sharp twist of her wrists, she ripped the passport in two. The sound, soft but unmistakable, was louder than any announcement. The room seemed to freeze. Two halves of the dark blue passport, with Imani's untouched photo and federal seal, fluttered from Carol's fingers and landed on the counter with a quiet, sickening thud. Silence. Passengers stared. Mouths open. Nobody moved. Carol stood tall, chest puffed like she'd slain a dragon. She wore the triumphant look of someone who thought she'd just saved the day. Imani stared at the shredded remains of her passport, the same document that had carried her across the world, proved her identity, and symbolized her place as a citizen. It lay in pieces. And in that moment, the invisible woman in gray joggers vanished. What remained was Imani Blake, federal investigator, architect of Operation Safe Skies. Her exhaustion faded, replaced by ice-cold clarity. Carol Higgins had no idea what she had just done. She thought she'd won a petty power game against someone she deemed unworthy. She had just declared war. The silence was eerie. All eyes at Gate B32 locked on the scene. A woman in the economy line a few people back instinctively raised her phone. The lens focused silently on the two women. Carol basked in the attention. Arms crossed. Smug. She thought she'd caught a fraud and protected her airline. In her mind she was the hero. Imani didn't look at her. Didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed fixed on the passport pieces. The torn seal. The exposed threads. The ripped eagle. It felt like someone had torn the very symbol of her nation in front of her. Then she raised her head, slowly, and looked Carol directly in the eyes. Carol was expecting a breakdown, a shouting match, tears, maybe a tantrum to justify her actions. What she got was worse, stillness. Imani's face remained calm, but her eyes? Sure, I see. Focused. You have just destroyed a United States federal document, she said, her voice calm, low, and terrifyingly clear. That's a federal offense. Title 18, Section 1543 of the U.S. Code. Mutilation or alteration of a passport. It carries a penalty of up to 25 years in prison. Carol's smugness cracked. Her mouth twitched. Her confidence dimmed. It was fake, she stammered. I was within my rights. I'm an agent of this airline, You were not, Imani interrupted. Still calm. Still lethal. You have a procedure. You're trained to follow it. You use a document scanner and a UV light to verify ID. And if you're still unsure, you call a supervisor. Airport security. At no point are you, a private citizen employed by a corporation, permitted to destroy federal property. You did not follow procedure. Why? The word hit like a hammer. People behind Imani leaned in. The woman with the phone stepped closer. I used my discretion, Carol blurted. Security is my responsibility. Your responsibility, Imani replied, is to follow the law and your company's regulations. She stepped back from the counter. Calm, deliberate. From her backpack she pulled out her phone. Carol flinched, expecting a threat, a weapon, anything. Instead, Imani tapped a single name on her favorites list. The call rang once. Then as it connected, she raised her voice, just enough for every stunned passenger in the gate area to hear. Let me tell you what you've done, Carol. You didn't just break the law. You compromised the very security you claim to protect. An individual who acts on bias, who escalates unnecessarily, and who destroys federal documents, that's not a guardian of safety. That's a liability. A click on the line. Director Evans? This is Blake. I'm at Lincoln Cross, Gate B32. Invoking Code Black on Operation Safe Skies. We've got an active breach and willful destruction of federal ID by a Skylinks Gate agent. I need TSA and the FBI's airport liaison team on site, now. Also notify Skylinks Legal. They're about to be in breach of their operating certificate. Gasp. Whispers. The phrase, Operation Safe Skies, and the mention of FBI rippled through the crowd like electricity. Carol's face drained of color. You're lying, she whispered. You're nobody. Imani ended the call, then looked Carol dead in the eye. My name is Imani Blake, she said, her voice full, resonant, final. I am the Senior Field Inspector for the Federal Aviation Administration's Office of National Security and Incident Response. For the past 10 days, I've been leading a national audit of your airline's compliance with federal security laws. Your actions, your profiling, your disregard for procedure, your criminal destruction of my ID, haven't just inconvenienced a passenger. You've handed us a live, documented, spectacular example of the exact type of systemic failure we are here to expose. She paused, letting every word land. So, Carol, one last time, why didn't you follow procedure? Was it poor training, or something else? Carol Higgins was speechless. She had no idea who she had just picked a fight with. But the world was about to find out. Just then, a man in a suit, slightly too tight and sweat already forming on his forehead, came hurrying down the jet bridge. What the hell is going on here? He barked. His name tag read Doug Sanford, station supervisor for Skylinks Airlines. Carol turned to him like a drowning woman grabbing a lifeline. Doug, this woman was trying to board with a fake passport. I confiscated it. It's clearly forged. She pointed vaguely at the two halves of the passport, careful not to mention that she had ripped it in half. Doug looked between Carol's frantic face and Imani's completely calm one. His instinct, like always, was to smooth things over, back his employee and keep the plane moving. Flight delays cost money. Money mattered more than complaints. Ma'am, he said to Imani, using his best tired corporate voice. I'm sure this is a misunderstanding. If there's an issue with your ID, I'm confident we can. Your time to sort this out has passed, Mr. Sanford. Imani cut in. Your employee has committed a federal crime. Your airline is now under active investigation by the FAA. Effective immediately, Flight 1142 is grounded. This gate is now a federal investigation site. Nothing, she gestured at the counter, is to be touched. Right on cue, two uniformed airport police officers appeared at the jet bridge, walking with quiet authority. Behind them were two people in dark suits, sharp-eyed, composed. Federal agents. The energy shifted. The quiet hum of the airport returned, but now layered with the static of radios, low murmurs, and the unblinking gaze of every witness. Carol stared at the approaching agents, then down at the torn passport, then up at Imani. The reality hit her like a tidal wave. The smugness? Gone. The power? Gone. All that remained was fear. She hadn't just made a mistake. She'd destroyed her career. Her life. All in 5 minutes, starting with a sneer and ending with the soft tear of her own ruin. The officers moved quickly, setting up a perimeter. Folks, we're going to need you to clear the area, one said. Please step away from the gate. The passengers shuffled back, whispering. They were no longer just travelers, they were witnesses. The woman still holding her phone camera? She hadn't stopped recording, just lowered it casually to her side. The lens still pointed directly at Carol. The two plainclothes agents walked straight to Imani. Blake, said the taller one, calm but alert. Agent Davies. This is Agent Chin. We got the call from Director Evans. What's the situation? Before Imani could answer, Doug Sanford, still trying to salvage the moment, stepped forward. Hold on. This is a Skylinks gate. This is my station. This woman, he pointed at Imani, is disrupting our operation. Agent Chin didn't even blink. She slowly turned her head to Doug. Her voice was flat. Cold. Sir, the moment a federal crime occurs on airport property, jurisdiction shifts. We are now in charge. Step back. Do not interfere. Doug's mouth opened and closed. But he said nothing. His corporate handbook wasn't built for this moment. He was outmatched. Imani faced the agents, her voice all business now. Agent Davies, Agent Chin, thank you for responding quickly. The subject, she nodded toward Carol, now pale and shaking, is a Skylinks gate agent. She refused to accept my valid U.S. passport for a domestic flight. After a series of inappropriate and racially charged comments, she deliberately destroyed the document. She pointed to the two halves of the passport. That's the evidence. I need it preserved. Her name is Carol Higgins. The station supervisor is Doug Sanford. Davies nodded, pulling on nitrile gloves. With tweezers, he carefully picked up the passport pieces and placed them into an evidence bag. That single act, so calm, so official, sealed Carol's fate more than anything else. It wasn't a dispute anymore. It was evidence in a federal case. Imani continued. The gate security cameras will have recorded the entire interaction. I need that footage pulled immediately from all angles before anyone has a chance to delete or lose it. Also, I want employee logs for this gate for the last 48 hours, and Skylinks' written protocol for verifying passenger ID. Consider it done, Agent Chin said, already murmuring into her wrist comms. Carol stood frozen, her brain refusing to process how fast the world had turned upside down. This wasn't supposed to happen. She'd always gotten away with this kind of thing. Always. She looked at Doug, her voice now desperate and cracking. Do something. Tell them I was just doing my job. I thought it was fake. I was protecting the flight. Doug looked at her. Then at the agents. Then at Imani. He was doing the math. Save her? Or save himself? The answer was obvious. Carol, what exactly happened here? He asked, his voice low now. Careful. No more defending her. Now he was gathering distance. Carol started to panic. She was being difficult. Dressed like that in first class. It didn't make sense. It was suspicious. Imani turned sharply. Her eyes locked onto Carol. Dressed like that? She asked, her tone razor sharp. Clarify for the record, Carol. What part of my attire did you find suspicious? Was it the university sweatshirt? Or the fact that a black woman was wearing it in the first-class line? The question sliced through the air like glass. Carol paled further. No. I didn't, I wouldn't. You wouldn't judge a passenger based on race? Imani said flatly. Your words and actions say otherwise. And I'm willing to bet your employment history does too. She turned to Agent Chin. Request the subject's complaint file from Skylinks HR. I want every formal and informal grievance ever filed against her. A strangled sound escaped Carol's throat. She thought of Mrs. Garcia, the elderly woman whose son filed a complaint when Carol made her board last because of her walker. She thought of the young Muslim man she flagged for random screening 3 flights in a row. She thought of the smirks, the snide comments, the passengers she thought didn't matter. Doug always told her to watch her tone, and then buried the reports. Now, those buried complaints were about to be dug up and held to the light by federal agents. And this time, there would be no one left to save her. Captain Hayes, the pilot of Flight 1142, made his way up the jet bridge after hearing about the delay. Silver-haired, calm and professional, he walked in expecting a minor gate issue. What he saw was chaos. Police, federal agents, a frozen crowd. His gate agent, Carol, pale and shaking. And a woman in joggers standing calmly in the middle of it all, completely in control. He turned to Doug Sanford. Doug, what in God's name is going on? He asked. Flight's grounded, Captain, said Agent Davies. This is now a federal crime scene. A crime scene? Hayes blinked. Over what? Imani stepped forward. Your gate agent destroyed a federal document and profiled a passenger, she said clearly. I'm the passenger. I'm also a senior investigator with the FAA. And I'm invoking a full investigation, starting now. The captain's eyes widened. He turned to Carol, stunned. He understood immediately, this was bad. Ma'am, he said to Imani, nodding with respect. On behalf of the crew, I sincerely apologize. This is not how we treat our passengers. Thank you, Captain, Imani replied. But the issue is no longer about service. We're now dealing with federal violations, both procedural and criminal. She turned back to Carol, who now looked like she might collapse. There was no fight left in her. Her smirk was gone. Her confidence shattered. She looked like someone waking up from a nightmare, only to realize it was real. Carol, Imani said softly but firmly, you're going to be escorted to an interview room. You have the right to remain silent. And I strongly suggest you use it until your attorney arrives. Because you're going to need one. The silence that followed was suffocating. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore, it was a takedown. Imani had flipped the script completely. Carol, once the queen of Gate B32, was now just a subject. A suspect. A case file. and Imani Blake, the woman in joggers, was holding the pen. The transition from gate area to interview room was fast. Carol found herself seated on a cold plastic chair in a beige, windowless room. Opposite her sat Agent Chin. Beside the door stood Agent Davies. The air smelled like disinfectant and fear. Carol's hands trembled slightly. "I want to call my husband," she whispered. "And Frank, Doug. I want to talk to Doug." "You'll have the chance to make a phone call," Chin said evenly. "Mr. Sanford is currently being interviewed separately. For now, I have a few basic questions." She opened a file. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Carol's ID photo was clipped to the top. "Full name for the record?" "Carol M. Higgins," she mumbled. "You've been the lead gate agent at this station for 7 years?" "Yes." Chin made a small check mark. "In your 2 decades with Skylinks, how many times have you received training on PIV protocol? Passenger identification and verification?" I don't know the number. We have refreshers every year." "And what does that protocol tell you to do if you suspect an ID is fake?" Carol swallowed hard. "We're supposed to use the scanner. The UV light. If we're still unsure, we call a supervisor or security." "Did you use the scanner?" "No." "Why not?" Carol hesitated. Everything in her wanted to lie. But the scanner had been right there. It just looked off. The way she was dressed. Her attitude. It felt wrong. "I was being proactive." Agent Chin didn't blink. "So you replaced a federal procedure with a feeling. Based on the fact that the passenger was dressed like that, your words." Carol tried to explain, but the words caught in her throat. "She was arrogant," she finally said. "She challenged my authority." "Is it your understanding," Chin replied smoothly, "that a passenger asking you to follow protocol is a challenge to your authority?" Silence. "Let's talk about the passport. You said it looked like a forgery. What specific features tipped you off? Was the hologram wrong? The microprint? The texture of the data page? Blank stare." Carol had no idea what any of that meant. It just looked fake." Chen's voice cut through the stillness like a knife. "So to be clear, you profiled a passenger, ignored your training, and destroyed her ID based on no technical evidence whatsoever. Is that an accurate summary?" The words stung. They rang loud and true. Carol's eyes watered. "I want a lawyer," she whispered. "A wise choice," Agent Chin said, closing the folder. "You'll be formally processed by airport police. The U.S. Attorney's Office will be in contact." Meanwhile, in Doug Sanford's cluttered office, Imani was in his chair, calm and poised. Doug sat across from her, sweating bullets. Agent Davies had just handed Imani the first 2 files she requested. An iPad with gate security footage. A slim folder with Carol Higgins' complaint history. "Mr. Sanford," Imani said, flipping through the file, "in the last 5 years, there have been 14 formal complaints against Ms. Higgins. 9 from passengers of color. 4 from people with disabilities. 1 from a passenger who appeared Middle Eastern." Doug shifted in his chair, uncomfortable. "Ma'am, in customer service, people file complaints when they miss flights." "These aren't about missed flights," Imani said, locking eyes with him. "These are about racism. Bias. Humiliation. There's a complaint from David Chin. Claims she asked if he spoke English after he handed over a valid New York license. Another from Aisha Sharma. Says her children's seats were lost after she requested a kid's meal. Another from a double amputee veteran. Says she told him he was holding up the line. She slid the file toward him. "And on every one of these, Mr. Sanford, I see your signature. Action taken. Counseled employee. Action taken. Verbal warning. Case closed." "I talked to her," Doug said, sweating. "I told her to be more careful with her words." "And yet," it continued, Imani cut in. "It escalated. Today it ended in a criminal act. You didn't manage her, Mr. Sanford. You protected her. You let her think her behavior was acceptable, as long as your flights were on time." Doug went pale. Imani stood. "Skylinks' operating certificate depends on following federal law. And that includes civil rights protections. You and your gate agent just gave us a textbook example of what happens when prejudice is ignored." She walked toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Doug," she added over her shoulder, "I watched the security footage. I heard your agent call me arrogant for asking her to scan my ID. Expect a subpoena. And think very carefully about what counseling really means." Then she left, leaving Doug alone, sweating in his own office as the walls around him began to collapse. Imani Blake's promise to put Skylinks' Atlanta operations under a microscope was not a threat. It was a fact. Within hours, what began as one torn passport at Gate B32 had escalated into a full-scale federal audit. And this time the FAA didn't send clipboard-carrying reps with checklists. They sent the Office of National Security and Incident Response, the sharp end of the spear. Imani set up a temporary command center in a glass-walled conference room on Skylink's property. The room, once used for budget meetings and PR briefings, was quickly filled with laptops and forensic tools, secure file servers, audio recorders and satellite phones. A team of hand-picked agents known for ruthless precision. They weren't here to make suggestions. They were here to take everything apart. There were forensic accountants, cybersecurity analysts, former NTSB investigators, the types of people airlines feared. The ones who didn't flinch at internal pushback. The ones who dug until the skeletons came crawling out. And they started with Carol Higgins' terminal. Her work computer was imaged. Her entire email history cloned. Within an hour they found exactly what Imani expected. A pattern. Carol had exchanged multiple emails with Doug Sanford over the past year, complaining about difficult passengers, joking about frequent flyers who barely speak English, and responding to reprimands with snide remarks. In one particularly damning message Doug had written, "Don't worry about the chin guy. I handled it. Just keep it less obvious next time. LOL." That LOL might as well have been his confession. But Carol wasn't the only problem. As the team started auditing employee files, more patterns emerged. They found a baggage supervisor who frequently lost luggage belonging to passengers with African or Middle Eastern names. A ticketing agent who consistently placed minority families in middle seats, even when aisle and window seats were available. A ground crew manager who had disabled a biometric scanner because it slowed down the line. These weren't isolated mistakes. They were small, repeated acts of quiet discrimination, the kind that were easy to ignore, easy to justify, and impossible to unsee once you added them up. "This isn't a bad apple situation," Imani said during the second day of briefings. "It's a rotten orchard." She stood in front of a whiteboard filled with names, dates, arrows, and red flags, a flowchart of systemic decay. Skylinks' Atlanta station is running a culture of willful blindness. Compliance is treated like a suggestion, not a requirement. Speed and profits are prioritized over human dignity and national security. But the most dangerous discovery wasn't racism. It was neglect. One of the maintenance auditors found irregularities while cross-checking flight logs and equipment servicing records. At first they were minor. Slightly overdue inspections. A part flagged for replacement still in use. Small deviations that might be chalked up to busy schedules. But then came a breakthrough. Flight 819, 3 months ago, had made an emergency landing in Denver due to a cabin pressure sensor failure. The report blamed an unpredictable part failure. But the audit showed the truth. The failed sensor had been given 2 life extensions, far beyond the manufacturer's safety limit. The log said the last inspection was signed by a mechanic named Luis Benton. Payroll records showed Luis was on vacation in Cancun that entire week. That wasn't a mistake. It was a cover-up. Doug Sanford hadn't just enabled racism. He had falsified safety records. He had endangered lives. The torn passport? That was just the match. Now the entire system was burning. Back in the now empty pilot's lounge, Captain Hayes sat across from Imani, nervous but respectful. He had been grounded along with the rest of the crew from Flight 1142, pending the audit. "Captain Hayes," Imani began, her voice neutral. "Your record is excellent. 25 years, no violations. Which is why I find it hard to believe you were completely unaware of the culture here." Hayes shifted in his seat. "My job is in the cockpit, Agent Blake," he said. "I fly the plane. I rely on the gate agents, the ground team, the mechanics. I have to trust them." "Trust," Imani said, "is not control. It's a variable. Did you ever notice signs? Rushed maintenance reports? Crew complaints? Uneven staffing?" Hayes hesitated. His loyalty was to his airline and his crew. But Imani clearly already knew the answer. "There've been whispers," he finally said. "A lot of pressure from management to speed up turnarounds. We were told to use discretion when reporting minor issues. Not delay flights unless absolutely necessary." "And Carol Higgins?" Imani asked. The captain sighed. "Everyone knew about Carol. We called her the gatekeeper. She had favorites. If you were on her good side, your boarding went smooth. If not, it didn't. We tried to stay out of her way. It was easier." Imani nodded slowly. "So you were aware of her behavior," she said. You saw it. And you chose to ignore it for the sake of an easier day. She let the word sit. Captain, that's not called delegation. It's called complicity. And that is the soil where people like Carol and Doug thrive. Hayes looked down, shame flickering behind his eyes. He'd always thought of himself as one of the good guys. But integrity wasn't passive. It wasn't about how he behaved in the cockpit. It was about whether he stood up, even when it was uncomfortable. And like too many others at Skylinks, he hadn't. Imani looked around the war room that once was a boardroom. It was covered in evidence now. Printouts of forged signatures. Complaint records that had been buried. Dozens of small abuses that added up to systemic rot. And it all started with one gate agent's decision to tear up a woman's passport. What Carol Higgins didn't know was that her victim was a federal officer. What Doug Sanford didn't know was that brushing things under the rug doesn't work when the FAA kicks down the door. And what Skylinks didn't realize was that Imani Blake wasn't just here to file a report. She was here to burn the rot down root and branch. The final report from Operation Safe Skies, with Skylinks' Atlanta hub at the center, was a masterpiece of destruction. A 172-page document packed with violations, bias incidents, falsified records, and near misses. It didn't stay classified for long. Director Evans, Imani's superior, made a calculated decision: leak the report to a major news outlet. Within 24 hours, the story exploded. Headlines screamed across every screen. The public outrage was immediate and relentless. For Carol Higgins, karma was swift. She was fired by Skylinks within an hour of the story breaking. The next morning, she was arrested at her suburban home. The footage of her being led out in handcuffs, robe half-tied, face stunned, became the viral image of the week. She was charged with destruction of federal documents, civil rights violations, obstruction of a federal investigation. Her legal defense collapsed almost instantly, especially when Doug Sanford turned on her. For Doug Sanford, karma wasn't just swift. It was devastating. He was fired, charged, and publicly shamed. But his real downfall came when investigators discovered the maintenance fraud he had covered up. Doug didn't just let Carol run wild. He had endangered lives, falsified inspection logs, ignored mechanical warnings, signed off on repairs that never happened. The FAA wanted to make an example of him, not just strip his job, but ensure he could never work in aviation again. Faced with decades in prison, Doug took a plea deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he handed over everything. Years of internal emails, evidence of racial complaints being buried, details on forged logs and manipulated turnaround reports. He went down, but he took a lot of people with him. And Skylinks Airlines? They were hit with one of the largest fines in FAA history. The number had so many zeros Wall Street analysts gasped. But it wasn't just about the money. A major portion of the fine was earmarked for rebuilding hiring practices, creating a federal compliance training center, installing real-time federal oversight at every major hub. For the next 5 years, Skylinks would be monitored by a court-appointed investigator. Imani Blake helped write the terms herself. Their stock price plummeted. Their CEO was forced onto live television for a cringeworthy apology tour. Every ad, every press release, every desperate Instagram post, ratioed. They were no longer the airline that gets you there for less. They were the airline that racially profiles passengers and skips maintenance checks. Brand trust? Evaporated. Meanwhile, the young woman who filmed the incident at Gate B32? Her video made its way across every platform. News stations, TikTok, Twitter, Hajichi. She was praised for her calm response and quick thinking. She became a symbol of citizen accountability. Imani later sent her a quiet, handwritten note. Thank you for standing still and pressing record. You helped hold power accountable. 6 months later, Imani Blake stood at a podium on Capitol Hill. This time, not in joggers or sneakers, but in a sharp navy blue suit. She looked powerful, poised, unapologetic. Behind her, a massive high-res photo of her torn passport was projected across the hearing room. She addressed a panel of senators. The events at Lincoln Cross International were not the result of one employee's bad day, she began. They were the result of a culture, one that tolerated bias, prioritized speed over safety, and dismissed federal compliance as optional. She detailed the findings, the buried complaints, the ignored protocols, the falsified records, the maintenance fraud. And then she delivered the line that echoed across every major news outlet that night. Bigotry is not just a social evil. In aviation, it's a national security threat. The moment we start making assumptions about passengers based on race, religion, or appearance, we open the door to far more than injustice. We open the door to disaster. She didn't shout. She didn't grandstand. She just told the truth, backed by evidence, integrity, and the weight of her work. She wasn't just a federal agent now. She was a reformer. A symbol. A warning to any corporation still pretending bias and shortcuts don't cost lives. As she packed up her notes, a young black congressional aide approached her. Nervous, awestruck. "Agent Blake," she said, almost whispering, "thank you for not backing down." Imani gave her a small, real smile. She thought of the gate, the humiliation, the fire that followed. "I just did my job," she said. And with that, she walked out of the building and into the sunlight, knowing that the karma that came for Carol, Doug, and Skylinks wasn't mystical. It was methodical. It was earned. It was the result of a system finally forced to hold the corrupt accountable, because one woman refused to stay silent. This story hit you in the gut. Share it. Someone else needs to hear it. Thumbs up, medium dark skin tone if you believe in standing up to injustice, even when it's quiet, even when it's subtle. Tap that like button. Bell subscribe for more true stories like this, where karma doesn't just knock, it files a federal report and walks in with backup. Thanks for watching. And remember, the most powerful tool in any system is a person who refuses to be silent.